With that being said, let's dig into our first game of the Five for Friday, and that's Coastal Carolina taking on Marshall. Now, when you even just say that, Coastal Carolina, if we would have talked about this game a couple weeks ago, we would probably be saying this is a team that should be ranked in the AP top 25. They're undefeated. Well, no longer did that happen, even though I'm wearing my Norfolk Tides hoodie today, not my Old Dominion. Still, the city of Norfolk, that college in Old Dominion, did defeat Coastal Carolina just the other week and gave Coastal Carolina their first loss of the season. Honestly, someone who went to Old Dominion, follows Old Dominion football, I was not planning for that to happen. Did not expect it, I should say. Not planning. I'm not on that board, not on that coaching staff. But I did not expect that to happen. ODU came out. They looked fantastic. Blake Watson with their running game really showed up. Coastal did not. Grayson McCall, we talked about Coastal a few times this season. I think I picked against them the first game of the year. They obviously shocked and surprised me because I said Grayson McCall is a fantastic quarterback. But who is he throwing it to? Do you remember that? I said, but who's he throwing the football to? And it really kind of shined that question mark in that game against Old Dominion. They head into Marshall, the Thundering Herd. Well, that's another story in itself. We've seen peaks and valleys with the Thundering Herd this year. They've beat teams like Notre Dame, and they've lost to teams like Bowling Green. Imagine if this was like 2014, Steve, and I said that to you. A team like Notre Dame who was battling for the national championship, and Bowling Green, who is usually on the other side of that spectrum, sitting in around the 130s. Well, they found a way to beat Marshall. Marshall is just having one of those weird seasons. The Sun Belt is just Stun Belt, Fun Belt, whatever you want to call it. This game is going to be a exciting matchup in my mind because you have this is like the chip on the shoulder game. This is what I should call this one. It's on NFL Network. When you think about that, it could be an opportunity for Grayson McCall to really shine and be like, all right, let's try to show some draft stock. Does Marshall do the shocker again and come in and do what they did against Notre Dame? They're technically a 2.5-point favorite against Coastal Carolina. Marshall's 4-3, Coastal Carolina's 6-1. Initially, right off the bat, I still lean towards Coastal because I have liked what I've seen in the past with this team, just not recently, against teams like Old Dominion. And, they did almost blow a lead in a pass game, but I do still lean towards Coastal. I think Grayson can get it done. What's your thoughts?
I'm leaning toward Marshall.
All right, cool.
Now, when we were first talking about it earlier in the season, and we were talking about teams like Coastal or James Madison that potentially should be in the top 25, I was the guy saying Coastal, and I think some of those blemishes, even though they were winning, were starting to show. They gave up over 500 yards to Old Dominion, which I know made you very happy.
Very happy.
As an alum. And they gave up 323 rushing yards. Marshall knows how to run the ball. They haven't been as consistent, and I think that's where their problems have been. They have not consistently been able to sustain an offensive attack throughout games at times. But, I look at this. I mean, Coastal Carolina is 108th in FBS in defense. I think Marshall, while they're not a big play offense, they can grind it out, control the clock. And I think that helps them dictate what's going to ultimately happen come the fourth quarter. I think, it's Marshall. See, I have friends that are big Marshall fans, and I see them on a weekly basis. So that's always the question that they have for me. Well, I don't understand. Marshall looks so good sometimes. That's very, very true. I think I think Coastal Carolina might have already hit their peak.
Yeah, maybe we see a valley from them.
Yeah. I don't know if they're going to be a plunging, a deep valley, but I think they're going to start coming closer to the pack. And Marshall really needs to win this game in order for them to. They really don't have legitimate hopes to win the Sun Belt, but because the Sun Belt has been so unpredictable, maybe they kind of do it. If they can win out, maybe they can be part of the conversation. So, I'm going to go with Marshall, and it's not necessarily that I don't like Coastal Carolina. I just don't like the way they've come out and played the last couple of weeks. So despite the 6-1 record and 3-1 in the conference, and it's not just Coastal, I think there's been a lot of teams, and not just in the Sun Belt, that we get all excited about, and then suddenly, okay, we're excited at their peak, but then they come out and fall flat, and then the next week they fall flat again. And so now you're starting to think, oh, okay, maybe we were a little bit too enthusiastic about a team like Coastal Carolina.
No, that's a very fair point. And honestly, I could see it happening that way. We just saw what Blake Watson from Old Dominion did to Coastal Carolina on the running side. Well, what about LeBourne? I mean, if
Yeah.
LeBourne can do that, he is a better running back than Watson. ODU's running game is just getting going with a brand new offensive coordinator in Slate. Marshall has a solid running game, and we've seen that all season. We've looked at them. They're averaging, let's see here, they're averaging 204 yards a game rushing. That's impressive. And, Coastal Carolina is allowing 150 yards per game. So you find that balance there. Let's call it in the middle, 175 yards rushing. If they do that, Coastal Carolina's in trouble. And that relates to your 109th, you said, in defense. So
100, and I'm sorry, I think I said 108, but it's 106 actually.
Okay.
I mean, my failing old man eyesight did not pick it up properly. Marshall already has a 1,000-yard rusher, or he already has 1,000 yards.
Right.
So, and Marshall does not allow the run. They shut that down. You mean the middle of their offensive line and their linebacking course, you don't run on Marshall. You might break a play here and there, but you don't run on them on a consistent basis. So that puts a little bit extra pressure on McCall. So does that get to be too much? I mean, he does have Pinochet, who seems to be his go-to receiver. He leads the team in receptions. But I think everything just kind of falls into place for Marshall, and it helps maybe get that bad taste of that Bowling Green loss, because, again, you and I both love the MAC, but yeah, Bowling Green is at the bottom part of that conference.
Yeah.
And they beat Marshall pretty convincingly. Not necessarily on the scoreboard, but when you watch that game, they beat them.
You're swaying me, Steve, for this one, and I do think that I'm going to lean over, and I think I am going to lean with you and take Marshall in this one. I think you're right. I think the running game, if we see LeBourne get going, what I saw when I watched Coastal play Old Dominion, and this is the last game they played, that Coastal, when they were down and they got down big pretty quick, Grayson turned into a one-dimensional player. He had to throw the ball, and it didn't look very, very good, knowing that they had to throw the football. If Marshall can get up and get up fast, which could happen, especially if they let the run game go and then have them crowd the box and then they find a way to get it over the top, I could totally see Marshall doing that, and they win this football game. So with that being said, I'm not going to play the spread because I'm leaning pretty close, not back and forth. It's a 2.5 point favorite for Marshall. I mean, honestly, play the money line, whatever you want to play. Green at 3 points is not much. Over under 55.5. That's pretty close to if you add up what each of them are averaging points per game. And this one, I think, because they might rely on the run game a little bit, if Marshall gets up early, they might not push it too much. They might go into a control game. I would lean towards the under in this one.
That was my thinking with that too. Was it 55.5?
Yeah.
So yeah. I mean, and I just don't see Marshall as being an explosive kind of offensive team, even though I think potentially they have the talent on the offensive side to maybe make big plays a little bit more. They're happy to run the ball. They know what they're doing. Their offensive line is much better in running schemes than pass protection. So yeah, fine, run the ball and just see what happens. If you need to throw later, I think they have enough talent that they could do that. But I agree, go with the under here. And but I do think Marshall will cover the 2.5.